The hospital room was drowning in silence, broken only by the uneven beeping of the heart monitor. David Miller lay motionless on the bed, his chest rising and falling in fragile rhythms. The color had drained from his face, his skin pale against the stark white pillow. Every breath sounded like a battle, shallow and uncertain, as though his body was fighting to hold on for just a little longer. Nurses passed the doorway with hushed footsteps, their voices lowered, as if afraid to disturb the fragile line between life and death. Some had seen countless final moments, but there was something different about this man. The air carried a weight heavier than usual, as if everyone silently acknowledged that David's time was running out. And yet, he wasn't entirely alone. Somewhere below, pacing anxiously in the hospital lobby, waited Ranger, a loyal German shepherd, who refused to let his human face his final moments without him. His ears perked at every sound, his body trembling with anticipation. Ranger didn't understand machines or medicine, but he understood one thing clearly: David needed him, and nothing would stop him from reaching his side. Ranger's nails clicked softly against the polished hospital floor as he was guided toward the elevator. His tail hung low, swaying with nervous energy, while his amber eyes darted to every corner of the building. The sterile smell of disinfectant made him uneasy, but stronger than his fear was the instinct pulling him forward. David was near. When the elevator doors slid open with a chime, Ranger hesitated for just a heartbeat. His reflection shimmered against the metal walls, ears twitching at the strange hum of machinery. A nurse standing inside whispered softly, "He knows." She pressed a gentle hand to her chest, eyes glistening as she watched the determined dog step inside. The ride up felt endless. Ranger stood rigid, sniffing the air, catching faint traces of David's scent through the maze of floors and corridors. When the doors finally parted again, he surged forward, almost pulling the leash from the handler's hand. The hallway fell silent as patients and staff turned to watch. A powerful German shepherd walking with such purpose was a rare sight in this place of sorrow. Ranger stopped at a door, his ears sharp, his nose pressed against the frame. Inside, his best friend waited, weak but alive. The door creaked open and Ranger padded softly into the room. The air inside was heavy, filled with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the faint, uneven rhythm of the heart monitor. David lay motionless on the bed, his skin pale against the crisp hospital sheets, his breath shallow and fragile. For a moment, Ranger froze at the threshold, his head tilted, ears twitching to the sound of his friend's weakening heartbeat. Then with careful steps, he crossed the floor. His claws barely made a sound against the tile as he reached the bedside. Slowly, Ranger pressed his cold nose against David's limp hand. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then fingers twitched. David's eyes fluttered open, glazed at first, then filling with tears as they focused on the familiar figure. His cracked lips moved, whispering, You came, buddy." The words were fragile, trembling yet filled with recognition. A soft whine escaped Ranger's throat as he climbed halfway onto the bed, resting his head gently against David's chest. His tail wagged faintly, though his body trembled with emotion, as if he understood the gravity of the moment. A nurse moved forward instinctively, but David raised a weak hand, signaling her to stop. The room fell into silence, except for the steady hum of machines and Ranger's quiet breaths. For the first time in weeks, a faint smile curved across David's lips. The bond between man and dog had bridged the gap between despair and hope. The room was still, every breath heavy with uncertainty. Ranger nestled against David's chest, his ears pressed flat as though he could absorb the fragile rhythm of his master's heartbeat. Nurses exchanged worried glances, torn between protocol and the undeniable tenderness unfolding before their eyes. David's chest rose in shallow waves, each inhale a struggle. His hand, weak and trembling, slid into Ranger's fur, clutching it as though holding on to the last anchor that tied him to this world. A faint whisper escaped his lips, cracked and raw. "Good boy, my best boy." Then it happened. The heart monitor beeped erratically, tones spiking and faltering. Everyone tensed. But instead of collapsing further, the chaotic rhythm slowly steadied. Breath by breath, David's lungs filled more deeply, his chest rising with newfound strength. A nurse gasped, covering her mouth. "He's stabilizing," she whispered, disbelief heavy in her voice. Tears blurred David's vision, but his gaze never wavered from the loyal eyes staring back at him. Ranger let out a soft whine, pressing a paw firmly against David's chest, as if swearing silently, "I'm here. I won't let go." Minutes stretched into eternity as the once dying man found his voice again. "Ranger, I missed you, buddy." The words were faint, but they echoed like a miracle in the sterile room. Nurses froze in awe. This was the first time David had spoken in days. Even hardened doctors accustomed to the line between life and death stood speechless. None could explain how a dog's love had revived a man's fading will. Yet, there it was, undeniable, extraordinary. Ranger shifted closer, his head resting against David's chest. The monitor continued its steady, reassuring rhythm. Hope, once extinguished, flickered back to life. Word of the extraordinary scene traveled faster than anyone could have imagined. By the next morning, doctors, nurses, and even patients from other floors quietly stopped by, peeking through the glass window of David's room. Some came out of curiosity, others out of disbelief, but every single one left in awe. David, who had been unresponsive for days, was now sitting upright, faint color returning to his cheeks. His once frail hand rested gently on Ranger's thick fur, grounding him to life itself. Nurses whispered in the hallways, calling it the dog's miracle. Even the head doctor, a man hardened by decades of practice, admitted, "I've never seen anything like this." That animal gave him the will to fight. Ranger never left David's side. He curled on the bed at night, his steady breathing a comfort that even machines could not provide. Each time David stirred or trembled, Ranger nudged him gently, as if reminding him, "I'm here. Keep going." Family members who had quietly prepared for the worst now watched with tears in their eyes as David's health steadily improved. His vitals stabilized, his voice returned, and for the first time in weeks, laughter flickered through the sterile room. Even visitors from other wards would pause by the door, some whispering prayers, others wiping tears. Ranger had become more than a dog. He was a symbol of hope. For David, every new breath felt like a gift. And for the hospital staff, the bond between man and dog was a reminder that healing often comes from places medicine cannot reach. Weeks passed, and David's recovery amazed everyone in the hospital. Each day his steps grew stronger, his smile brighter, and his voice steadier. The man who had once been declared too weak to last the week was now walking the halls with Ranger at his side. Staff would pause just to watch, some offering quiet applause, others shaking their heads in disbelief. One sunny morning, the head doctor walked into David's room holding a chart, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "David," he said warmly, "you're going home today." For a moment, silence filled the room before joy broke across David's face. His eyes glistened with tears as he reached down to Ranger, who wagged his tail furiously, as if he had known all along. Nurses gathered at the doorway, clapping softly, watching the once dying man stand tall again. When David stepped outside the hospital doors, the sunlight felt different, warmer, fuller, alive. Ranger trotted proudly beside him, head high, as though he were leading his human into a second chance at life. From that day forward, the two were inseparable. Their bond, forged in pain and strengthened by love, had carried them through despair to hope. Together they were ready to begin again. Life after the hospital felt like a miracle David never thought he would see. Each morning he and Ranger walked through the quiet neighborhood, the man waving to neighbors while the dog trotted proudly by his side. What once felt like borrowed time now felt like a gift. Doctors still called his recovery extraordinary, but David knew the truth. Medicine had healed his body, yet it was Ranger's loyalty and love that had healed his spirit. The bond between them went beyond words, beyond science, beyond even time itself. Whenever David faltered, Ranger was there steady as a heartbeat, reminding him he was never alone. And in those simple everyday moments, sunlight on his face, the sound of Ranger's paws against the pavement, David found the greatest miracle of all, a second chance at life given to him not by medicine, but by love. In life, we often underestimate the quiet power of loyalty and presence. David's story with Ranger reminds us that healing isn't always found in medicine or logic. It's found in love and connection, and being truly seen and not left alone. Just as Ranger's loyalty brought strength back to his owner's fading body, the relationships we nurture can become the lifeline that carries us through our hardest battles. The lesson is clear: never overlook the impact of love, whether from people or even our animals. Sometimes what someone needs most is not advice, solutions, or even words, but the simple reassurance of presence, someone willing to stay by their side no matter how dark the road becomes. By choosing compassion, loyalty, and empathy, we can offer others a reason to keep fighting and in turn find strength ourselves. Love, when given freely, can be the most powerful medicine of all.